Some sad news today. Representative Elijah Cummings has died at 68. Plus, we have the latest on the impeachment testimonies, and the Chicago public school teachers are on strike. But first, here are your headlines.
Britain's Prime Minister and the EU Commission President now say they have reached a new Brexit deal.
We have a deal, and this deal means that there is no need for any kind of prolongation. This is a fair, a balanced agreement. It is testament to our commitment to finding solutions. It provides certainty where Brexit creates uncertainty. It protects the rights of our citizens, and it protects peace and stability on the island of Ireland.
For us in the UK, it means that we can deliver a real Brexit that achieves our objectives. And it means that the UK leaves whole and entire on October the 31st. And it means that Northern Ireland and every other part of the UK can take part.
This morning, this Utah trooper saving an unconscious driver with just seconds to spare. His car stopped on the tracks with a train barreling straight ahead.
I actually wasn't really thinking. I was just doing my job, and the main concern was getting him out and get out of the vehicle and back to his family.
The train blasting its horn, smashing into the car, sending it flying as Correa hurls them out of harm's way. The train grinding to a halt, the car ending up a mess of mangled metal. Neither Correa nor the driver were injured.
20 ancient coffins in Egypt are being called one of the most important archaeological finds in recent years. They were discovered recently along the Nile River. The coffins were stacked inside a large tomb, and they were sealed and intact. Amazingly, their colors and carvings have not faded despite being at least 2,000 years old.
And we begin with that breaking news. Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings has passed away at the age of 68, a son of sharecroppers that went on to fight tirelessly for justice for his own Baltimore community and this country. He was a force, and as the outspoken chairman of the House Oversight Committee, he helped lead the investigation of President Trump up until his last days in Congress. Here's just one of his few memorable moments just a few months back. Take a look.
The one meeting I had with President Trump, I said to him, the greatest gift that you and I, Mr. President, can give to our children is making sure that we give them a democracy that is intact.
Yeah, so I want to bring in Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, the former mayor of Baltimore, joins us on the phone. And we also have Derek Johnson, the president of the NAACP. Stephanie, I'll start with you. So much to say about this man, but what are your thoughts on this very big loss today?
It is an overwhelming sense of loss personally for his family and for our city, and really for the country. Elijah Cummings, I've known him since I was a child. He served in the legislature with my father, and I always looked to him as a person that I could turn to personally, professionally, to think that someone who has given so much is no longer with us. It's devastating for our city.
Yeah, and Derek, I just want you to talk about what you think his legacy will be for Maryland and the country.
Well, Congressman Cummings was not just a congressman for the citizens of his district. He was a United States congressman for all the citizens of this country. As chairman of the Oversight Committee, he held that position with distinction. His control of the rules and the process was something that we can all be proud of. As he began to pursue the question of the veracity around the activities of the presidents. For me, I akin his talent, his skill to that of Robert Jordan during the same period of impeachment during the Nixon hearing.
Yeah, and Stephanie, I mean, we know that you worked with him so closely. What do you want people to remember about him, to know about him?
I want people to remember what a selfless fighter he was. He was under no false illusion about his health. He knew that he was ailing, and I can imagine so many other people would have retreated from their duties to take care of themselves, where he did the opposite. He dug in, he worked until his last breath, and he did so for the next generation. And he always talked about it, how his work was to make sure that the next generation, a generation that he would not see, would have the opportunities that were denied to him and his ancestors. And I am grateful that he got to walk the walk in his life, and his deeds reflect his core values, and that's something that we cannot take away from him, and I hope will be always remembered.
Yeah, and Stephanie, you had a personal relationship with him. What was he like outside of his work?
He was kind. He was generous with his time. He was thoughtful and caring, and he took what he did very seriously. He didn't take himself. He wasn't stuffy. He didn't take himself seriously in the sense that he was down to earth. He was Baltimore to his core, and I think a testament to the person that he was. And I'm not trying to make this political, but we see a president who, in so rare occasions, is presidential, what we expect for someone at a time that requires someone to console a city, a state, a nation. And I was incredibly touched by the words of President Trump in his condolence message, because I think it speaks to the power of Congressman Cummings' legacy, that even Trump had to get himself together to, say goodbye and honor him in a way that was fitting of the statesman that Congressman Cummings was.
And Derek, I want your final thoughts on this. What do you want people to know about him?
I think the former mayor's last comment was clear. He was a statesman. He is a person we can hold up as an example for young people from across the country to look to. He served with distinction. He had control of the information, and he knew the rules, and people respected him for that.
All right, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, former mayor of Baltimore, and Derek Johnson, president of the NAACP. We thank you guys for joining us today. And just so you guys know, the White House is flying the American flag at half-staff for Representative Cummings. All right, so we move on to the White House and the impeachment investigation. The U.S. ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, is testifying on the Hill today, and I want to bring in Catherine Falders on Capitol Hill. Catherine, good to see you. I know you have some new reporting on what he's going to be saying today.
Yeah, so this is the U.S. ambassador to the EU. He'll be behind closed doors, potentially for the longest time that we've ever seen one of these depositions. Now, his name came to light in text messages that were turned over to the committee a couple of weeks ago from the former envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker. Now, why that's so important and why the Sondland text messages are so important is because he was in communication with these two other diplomats, specifically about this quid pro quo that Democrats and Republicans keep talking about. But we've learned from his opening statement that what he's going to say is he's really going to split with President Trump here. He's going to say that the president directed him and these other diplomats to work specifically with his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to push Ukraine to announce these investigations. Now, what Sondland will say was that he was in the dark on the extent of Giuliani's efforts and the political motivations behind it, but it could be the closest, Kimberly, that we get to this quid pro quo, essentially saying if you do this, if you announce these investigations, there was talk about drafting a statement specifically as it related to Biden and his son Hunter Biden's work, then you can have a meeting with the Ukrainian president at the White House.
Yeah, and Catherine, I want to ask you about how the White House is responding to this because, of course, they didn't want him to testify, and now through this subpoena, he has to.
Right. They didn't want him to testify. I think it was about a week ago. They blocked him from testifying before the committee. He was in town ready to sit down with these congressional investigators. But this time he is appearing here under subpoena. But the committee did ask for a number of documents. Now, they already have these text messages in question from other depositions that have been turned over. But they asked for a series of documents for him to turn over to help better understand the Ukraine situation. And what happened was that his lawyer says that he wasn't authorized to turn them over, but they urged the State Department to turn over these particular documents to Congress. Well, what we know now, and a letter from his lawyer, is that the State Department said, sorry, we're not going to give you these documents that you need. They could be covered by executive privilege. So look, they have his testimony here behind closed doors for hours today, but he is under subpoena and they're not getting the documents that they need. The administration's continuing to stonewall on that front.
All right, Catherine Falder's right there on Capitol Hill. And I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House, because another significant story out of Washington is this tense exchange yesterday where top Democrats walked out of that meeting about Syria after they say the president started insulting them, Karen.
Yeah, this was a bipartisan meeting. Congressional leaders and also the heads of committees from both the House and Senate. And the focus, Kimberly, was Syria and Turkey. But just to set the stage for what was happening right before this meeting, the House voted overwhelmingly on a non-binding resolution. So what that means is they were sending a message to President Trump. And you had about 350 members saying yes and 60 saying no. 2/3 of Republicans siding with the Democrats to say they disagree with the president's actions in Syria, and they condemn his decision to pull back U.S. troops from that region, of course, setting up this latest offensive by Turkey. This was quite a show of force from members of Congress to say they don't support the president on these policies that he was forcefully defending yesterday here at the White House. So we're told from sources in the room the president was already a bit upset when he sat down for that meeting. Democrats say he asked who scheduled this, how did this come about, when they say it was the White House that put it together. Well, it got a little heated and it got personal, and Democrats say the president was insulting Nancy Pelosi, calling her a third-rate politician or third-grade politician, some discrepancy on what was actually said, and Pelosi got up and left the meeting. Now, the White House says the president was perfectly fine in his tone, he was decisive, but notably they're not taking issue with some of the quotes that the Democrats say he said in there. Most notably, I think, a criticism of his former defense secretary, James Mattis, four-star general. The president called him overrated and said that he was not tough, especially when it came to ISIS.
Yeah, Karen, so, I mean, what happens next? Because, I mean, all the energy is very tense. How will they get anything done under these conditions?
Yeah, no, they're probably not going to. I mean, this was a meeting that I think was aimed at trying to get the president to make his case behind closed doors, the case he's been making in public for the last week and a half. We heard him say at the White House yesterday that this is not the United States fight to fight there in northern Syria. He says this is between Turkey and the Syrian Kurds, and that Syria should get involved. And you'd be fine if even Russia or Iran got involved, that the United States is 7,000 miles away and we're staying out of it. There is big blowback to that, even from the president's own party, even close allies like Lindsey Graham, continuing to say that if ISIS regroups in that area, that the president will own that reemergence. And this is a major mistake by the Trump administration. Yesterday, I think the president was trying to convince some people of why he's been taking these actions. Instead, he was clearly not in a mood, and it turned very personal, and the meeting ended.
All right, Karen Travers at the White House with the latest there. Thank you so much. And speaking of Syria, we're moving over there where a U.S. delegation, including Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, meeting with Turkish President Erdogan to try and negotiate a ceasefire. And this comes after the Turkish invasion against Syrian Kurds happened after President Trump basically greenlit this operation. So I want to bring in James Longman, who's on the ground in northern Iraq. James, you know, it seems like the president is trying to distance himself while his team is over there trying to put his own fire out.
Yeah, that's right. You know, he spoke about their own wars, and there's very much a sense sometimes when people talk about the Middle East that there are wars that are inevitable and that somehow the Turks and the Kurds are always destined to fight. And it's true that there is enmity between these two groups. It goes back many, many years, the end of the Second World War, in fact, where all the borders that were drawn in this part of the world were decided and the Kurds were basically left out of it. And the PKK in Turkey is a terrorist organization. It is designated as such, not by just by Turkey, but by the United States and other countries as well. But I think what President Erdogan is doing is conflating the issue by calling all of those Kurds in northern Syria terrorists as well. And it's in that context that, as you say, Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence are here trying to negotiate some kind of ceasefire. I think the prospects for that are very, very slim. We've seen pictures just in the last few moments of Mike Pence having held his meeting with President Erdogan. It was supposed to last 10 minutes and actually lasted 80. Picture of the two of them together looking pretty stony-faced emerged. And then now there's an expanded bilateral meeting where Vice President Pence is there alongside Mike Pompeo and then the entire Turkish delegation, including the Turkish Vice President and others. So we're yet to hear just exactly what the result of that is, but President Erdogan has been very, very clear. He will not negotiate with people he regards as terrorists. He wants to create a massive buffer zone in northern Syria, which would essentially ensure that there were no more Kurds there. That, his critics say, is called ethnic cleansing. And so what we've been seeing here now, the sort of 9th day of this play out in front of us, the fighting has continued. It is not slowing down on the border. Ras Al Ain, a very strategically important border town. The Turkish are continuing to bombard that with artillery. They're finding it very difficult to dislodge these battle-hardened Kurds from that town.
Yeah, and James, before we go, I just want you to talk about a rather strange letter from President Trump to President Erdogan.
Yeah, it was absolutely extraordinary. It's one of those things where you read and you think this has got to be fake, and then you realize that it isn't, and so you're just totally dumbfounded by it all the more. He wrote to President Erdogan on the October 9th asking him not to carry out this offensive, but the tone of the letter is extraordinary. He says, "Dear Mr. President, let's work out a good deal," ! Something that President Trump is known for. He says, "You don't want to be responsible for slaughtering thousands of people, and I don't want to be responsible for destroying the Turkish economy, and I will." And then at the end of the letter, he says, "History will look upon you favorably if you do get this done right and the humane way." He said, "Don't be a tough guy, don't be a fool," ! And then at the end of it, for some reason, he writes, "I will call you later," in a letter, as though it was perhaps a text message. This letter did not do the job it was presumably intended to do, which was to stop President Erdogan from launching this military offensive. It's reported that he immediately threw this letter in the bin. So that first effort at diplomacy presumably failed, or we now see it has failed. We will see whether or not this latest effort with the Vice President and the Secretary of State has any more luck. Kimberly?
All right, James Longman right there on the ground in the Middle East. Thank you so much for the updates. And guys, there's no doubt that the decision that the president has made in regards to Syria has severe consequences. If you remove the politics of it all, you will find real cities with real people, families and children affected in unimaginable ways, death and displacement, creating a full-blown humanitarian crisis. So I want to bring in Amjad Yamin with the organization Save the Children. Thank you for joining us today. I really want you to talk about the level of displacement for the children in this region.
Thank you. So let me start by saying that Northeast Syria, for some time now, has been one of the most complex humanitarian settings that we've had to work in. Since the beginning of the crisis, there are now about 1.3 to 1.4 million people who are in dire need of humanitarian assistance in Northeast Syria. In the last 6 days alone, that number has increased by about 170,000 or 180,000 people, in addition to the 1.3 million who are in need of humanitarian assistance in the 6-7 days alone since the beginning of the military escalation in the area. The numbers we estimate now is at least 70,000 children have been displaced in the last 6 days. These children are living in open areas. So they're living in collective shelters like houses, like factories, like schools that are now, in some cases, one classroom or one room will be hosting 3 or 4 or 5 different families. They need access to clean drinking water, to food, and as the temperatures are now dropping, considering it's getting significantly colder now in Syria, we are seeing a lot of families in need of help. for winter. We're talking about blankets. We're talking about areas where they can sleep, where they can shelter themselves, shelter their children, let alone like when we start discussing, looking at things like how can children go back to school, how can we return them to any sense of normalcy in their lives. Children we talk to every day on the ground through our operations will tell you things like we just want to play, or some of them, a child in Syria literally 2 weeks ago told us that they've never had a toy in their lives.
Wow. It's kind of unbelievable to imagine, and of course, there would be mental health consequences to experiencing all of this. What are the children actually experiencing with this being their reality?
It is particularly sad to look at children who have had, from early on, from being 2 or 3 years old, have had to work, have had to not have a single day of normal life. We're talking about children now in Syria who are 9 years or younger, have never lived a single day outside of conflict city. The children need love, they need to be accepted, they need times and dedication from parents, they need to be able to go to school. It is very difficult to provide a lot of this in conflict settings. There's also when children suffer from injuries for extended periods of time. Our operation have met one child in northeast Syria about 3 weeks ago who had a shrapnel wound in one of her legs and have not had it treated for 4 months because she could not access medical aid in the area. And these types of things that children have to go through have a severe impact on their ability to accept the world, on their ability to feel loved, on their ability to grow out and become and fulfill their own destiny, their own future as we can do.
Yes, a tragic situation in so many ways. I want to thank Amjad Yamin with Save the Children right there in Jordan. Thank you for that. And guys, we're going to move on to this Noreaster that's hitting the East Coast. Torrential rain pounding New York last night and thousands without power from high winds in Connecticut. So our Whit Johnson is on the ground in Duxbury, Massachusetts with the latest. Whit, I just want to see if you can give us an update on what the damage is where you are.
Well, Kimberly, this is exactly what officials were warning us about. The powerful, violent wind gusts, 70, 80, 90 miles per hour in some place. That's hurricane strength wind gusts. And take a look at the result behind me here. 2 trees down in front of this home, one smashing a car, the other one crashing through the roof. A woman was inside at the time when that tree came down. She was able to make it out okay, no injuries at all, but that home is now uninhabitable. And this has been the story throughout the Northeast, from Virginia to D.C., Philadelphia, Connecticut, New York, up here into Massachusetts and further north. We've seen downed trees, we've seen downed power lines. We've also seen a number of accidents. The commute yesterday evening was brutal. We saw in Philadelphia, or outside Philadelphia, there was a van that flipped over. 11 people were inside, 3 people killed, multiple others taken to nearby hospitals. And this is really what we've seen throughout the area. Now, the worst of it has moved to the north, but they're still expecting major wind gusts upwards of 50 miles per hour in this area throughout the day.
Yeah, Whit, incredible damage. And what about the power outages? Because I know Connecticut was suffering from that a little bit as well.
Exactly, and you can see it's the same thing with the trees, with the power lines. This is a heavily wooded area. Trees have come down, branches have come down, taking out power lines, knocking power out to hundreds of thousands. At one point, that number was at 500,000 customers without power in 5 different states in New England. Now, those numbers are fluctuating throughout the course of the morning because crews have been able to fix one problem, but then we still have these gusts, and they've been dealing with problems elsewhere. So we do expect those numbers to change. The good news, though, the worst of the storm has moved on, and so crews have been working around the clock, clearing debris, trying to get power restored.
All right, well, we certainly hope everyone stays safe. Whit Johnson right there in Duxbury, Massachusetts with the latest. Thank you so much. And guys, before we go, we're going to go to Chicago, where public school teachers are on strike today at a standstill in contract negotiations with the city. So our Alex Perez is on the ground in Chicago with the latest there. Alex, good to see you. Want to know what they are actually demanding in this strike.
Hey, Kimberly, good to see you as well. I'll tell you what they're asking for in just a second, but first I want to show you the scene behind me here. Take a look. This is what it looks like outside all of Chicago public schools this morning and for the day today. About 25,000 teachers now officially on strike. That means some 300,000 students that are part of this district, their education is on pause right now. Now, you ask, what exactly is it that the teachers are demanding? Now, surprisingly to a lot of people, this right now standstill is not about money. They've seemed to have reached an agreement when it comes to salaries, but what the teachers are demanding here is smaller classrooms and more support. They say they need supporting staff like nurses and teachers' aides, more of those people on board at every single school. But the mayor says what the teachers union is asking for would cost about $2.5 billion more. The cash-strapped city, the mayor says that's just not possible right now. So that's what's caused this standstill and the strike. Kimberly?
Yeah, and Alex, I see that there's some students behind you. You said the students' education is on pause right now, but how will this impact them as this goes along? Do they just stay out of school for the entire duration?
Well, that's pretty much what's happening right now. They won't have any classes or instruction. The school buildings will be open. They will be serving meals. You got to remember, a lot of these kids have nowhere to go during the day. A lot of parents were not able to make last-minute arrangements. A lot of these kids rely on free school lunches or reduced-price school lunches. So they're serving those meals. They're bringing kids here, allowing them into all the school buildings, those that have nowhere to go, but there won't be any instruction or classes happening until the strike is over. Now, remember, we're talking about 300,000 kids, the third largest school system in the country. So we're talking about a huge amount of people, parents everywhere, as you might imagine, want to see this resolved.
All right, Alex Perez, right there on the ground in Chicago. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And guys, thanks for joining us. Continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room, which I'll be filling in today for Devin Dwyer. You can see that at 3:30 p.m. And then you can stick around for World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. And I'll see you later. Thanks so much.